1,000 women, 1,000 desires, but none of them were enough. Solomon had everything a man could ever want: gold, power, fame, but nothing fascinated him as much as women. He didn't just desire these women, he collected them. To him, love wasn't a connection, it was an empire. 700 wives, 300 concubines, foreign princesses, exotic women, figures parading through his palace like trophies of an endless obsession. While other kings waged wars to conquer lands, Solomon conquered bodies. They say he never spent a single night alone. The king who began his journey asking for wisdom ended up consumed by his own desires. But was it just that? Women were not the only thing that led to his downfall. They were just the beginning. There was something more, something Solomon never imagined he would be capable of doing. The wisest man on earth, the one who received a divine gift that no one else had, threw it all away for something that, to this day, destroys thousands of people. But what really happened? What could be even more dangerous than an obsession with women? Stay with us until the end, because the answer may surprise you and even change the way you see your own life. Before Solomon got lost in his own desires, he was a young king with a divine calling. The son of David and Bathsheba was not a warrior like his father. He did not wield swords. He did not lead armies. He did not conquer cities. But he had something that few leaders possessed: a strategic mind and an ambitious vision. When he ascended to the throne, he inherited a strong and united kingdom. The people of Israel were thriving, and now it was up to him to lead the nation into an era of glory. But there was something weighing on his shoulders. He knew his mission was too great to be carried out by his own strength alone. Then, one night, God appeared to him in a dream, and what happened there would change his story forever. The Lord's voice resounded, "Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you." Now stop and think. If God made this offer to you, what would you ask for? Power, wealth, the destruction of your enemies? Solomon could have chosen anything. But he made a request that even surprised heaven. "Lord, give me wisdom to govern your people." Wisdom. He could have asked for anything, and he chose something that would benefit others. A humble request, coming from a heart that, at that moment, was fully devoted to God. Not only did God grant his request, but he gave him much more than he had asked for. Along with wisdom, he promised Solomon wealth, honor, and a glory unlike any other king had ever known. And soon, this became evident. His wisdom was undeniable, his decisions were precise, and his fame spread beyond the borders of Israel. You've probably heard the story of the judgment between two women fighting over a baby. Each one claimed to be the mother, and there was no way to prove who was lying. Solomon looked at them and made a decision that would change everything. He ordered, "Bring me a sword, cut the child in half. Each woman will receive a portion." The room was in shock. But then the true mother cried out in despair, "No, give the baby to her, but do not kill him." And that was how Solomon revealed the truth. The woman who was willing to give up her child so he could live was the true mother. It was decisions like this that made his fame spread like an uncontrollable fire. People from all over came to hear his advice. Kings and queens sought his guidance. Israel was at its peak. But in the midst of it all, something silent was growing inside him. And this seed, which seemed harmless at first, would be the beginning of his downfall. In the ancient world, marrying foreign princesses was a sign of prestige and political alliance. Each marriage strengthened the empire. But for Solomon, it wasn't just strategy. It was desire, a desire that grew faster than his wisdom could control. The Bible reveals an astonishing number: 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women, 1,000 faces, 1,000 stories. Women from all corners of the world brought to live in his palace like pieces of an endless collection. Moabites, Ammonites, Hittites, Sidonians, Egyptians, women from allied kingdoms, and even from the very nations that God had forbidden the Israelites to intermarry with. Now imagine what life was like inside that harem, 1,000 women waiting for a moment of attention. Some went weeks, maybe months, without seeing the king. Others were favored, covered in jewels and luxurious dresses. But all of them competed with one another, a place filled with intrigue, rivalry and jealousy, each woman trying to be the chosen one. And at the center of it all, Solomon, surrounded by luxury and pleasure, each night with a different woman, each desire fulfilled without resistance. Each woman was another trophy, another conquest to display in his empire of lust. But the women did not come alone. They brought something more, something that would change the history of Israel forever. Solomon, the man who built the temple of the Lord, began to make compromises. He never imagined that he was taking the first step toward his own destruction. What seemed like just an innocent desire would soon become the final blow that separated Solomon from God. But he still didn't see it. Blinded by pleasure, he didn't realize ruin was approaching. And when he finally did, it was too late. Solomon's women were more than just wives. They were queens of foreign lands, daughters of pagan kings, priestesses of unknown gods. They didn't just enter the palace, they brought with them their customs, their traditions, their rituals. And so, little by little, the wisest king on earth began to bow to the desires of his wives. At first it was subtle, just a small request here, another there, a tiny altar in an isolated corner of the palace, a simple permission for one of them to worship her God without being disturbed. Nothing major, just a concession to keep peace within the harem. But soon, small requests turned into demands. One after another, the women wanted more. If one had permission to worship her God, why couldn't the others have the same? And so, altars began to spread across Israel. Solomon, the king who built the temple of the Lord, was now building temples for foreign gods. The man who had received wisdom from God himself was now allowing sacrifices to pagan deities. The priests began to murmur. The people began to question. How could the wisest king in the world make such an absurd mistake? But Solomon saw no mistake at all. To him, it was just another display of his power. He failed to see that in trying to please his wives, he was betraying the very God who had placed him on the throne. And then, without realizing it, he crossed a line from which he could never return. The heart that was once filled with the presence of God was now divided. His love for women was not just a carnal desire, it was a spiritual submission. And God saw it all, and God did not remain silent. The king who had received everything would now hear a judgment that would forever change the destiny of his lineage. And when the sentence was spoken, Solomon knew his glory was coming to an end. Solomon believed he was in control. He ruled the richest kingdom on earth, possessed the largest harem in history, and commanded alliances with powerful nations. But there was one thing he ignored for far too long. The God of Israel was watching. The same God who had given him wisdom, riches, and glory now saw his servant kneeling before foreign idols. The man who had received everything from God was now betraying him with his own hands. But the Lord, patient and merciful, waited. He sent signs, he raised prophets, he tried calling Solomon back. But the king, blinded by power, refused to listen. Until one day, God spoke. But this time, it was not a warning. It was a sentence. The Lord said, "Since you have turned away from me and worshipped other gods, I will take the kingdom from your hands. Your son will not inherit the throne as he should. Israel will be divided." These words fell upon Solomon like an unbearable weight. He knew what this meant. The kingdom that David, his father, had built with so much effort would be torn apart. The name of his house, which was meant to rule Israel forever, would be weakened forever. Solomon was still on the throne, but something had changed. He began to realize that everything he had pursued meant nothing. His gold, his palace, his women, all felt empty. And then something even worse happened. His enemies began to rise. The king, who had always had dominion over all nations around him, was now watching his alliances fall apart. Rebellions started forming within Israel itself. The same nations that once paid him tribute were now plotting against him. And it was at that moment that he understood. Everything he had pursued, all the women, all the luxury, all the fame, meant nothing. The Bible does not describe a moment of public repentance from Solomon, but his own words reveal that he understood the mistake he had made. In his final years, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, where his view on life changed drastically. In Ecclesiastes 1:2, he wrote, "Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity." The richest, wisest, and most powerful king in the world realized that the pursuit of pleasure and wealth is nothing but an illusion. And at the end of his book, he left the greatest lesson of his life. In Ecclesiastes 12:13, Solomon said, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." With this, Solomon left behind a bitter testimony of his own choices. He lived everything a man could ever live, and discovered too late that without God, nothing makes sense. Now reflect. Solomon spent his entire life seeking pleasure, power, and knowledge. He had 1,000 women, countless riches, and an empire that no one had ever matched. But in the end, he realized that he had wasted the greatest opportunity of his life. What was the point of being the wisest man in the world if his wisdom didn't keep him from being lost? What was the point of building God's temple if he himself turned away from the Lord? What was the point of ruling Israel's most glorious kingdom if, after his death, everything was destroyed? And that was the moment he understood. The only thing that truly mattered he had left behind. In his final days, Solomon wrote reflections on his life. His words are not those of a triumphant king, but of a man who learned the lesson in the hardest way possible. He realized that he had spent his life trying to satisfy a void that only God could fill. He saw that everything he had built was about to collapse. His own son, Rehoboam, was not able to keep the kingdom united. As soon as Solomon died, the northern tribes rebelled, fulfilling God's prophecy. The great kingdom of Israel, which had reached its peak under Solomon's rule, was torn in half and never returned to what it once was. That was the true end of Solomon. He left us with a warning. Do not make the same mistake. Do not waste your life chasing after things that in the end will bring you nothing but regret. Do not trade God for something that will never be able to fill your soul. Today, many live like Solomon, surrounded by desires, seeking more and more, thinking they will be happy once they have everything. But in the end, they realize that none of it matters without God. And now I ask you, what are you placing above God in your life? Are you seeking wealth, pleasures, or recognition, thinking that this will be enough? Are you drifting away from God without even realizing it? Solomon showed us where this path leads. And it is up to us to decide whether we will follow in his footsteps or learn from his mistake. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Solomon truly repented, or was it too late? What was more dangerous, his women or his idolatry? Let us know in the comments below. And if this content blessed you, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. That's all for today, and may God bless you greatly.